Welcome to On the Bauble podcast, episode 41. I'm your host, Sabasa J. Ueda, and with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today, we're going to be doing an episode on our Monarch series for Prism. So we're going to be talking about the gameplay, key cards, equipment, attack actions, defense, just everything we can think about Prism. We're going to be talking about that today. But before we do that, how was your week, Yuki?
My week's been really good. I finished report cards yesterday, which is Monday. And so that means I'm pretty much done. Technically, students can still hand stuff in late, and there's like a little bit that I need to go back and do, but I'm pretty much wrapping up the school year. Classes are done as of today. So just kind of winding down, get to pack up, and the next couple of days should be pretty chill. And then I'm off for the summer. Also, went to Armory on Monday and very cool seeing quite a few new players, some people who have quite a bit of experience in the game and have moved here, and also just some brand new people picking up blitz decks and playing them and trying them out. And it just, the last little while when I've been going to Armory, I just feel like there's new people like pretty regularly, which is really cool to see. It feels like the game's really picking up speed here. How has your week been, Jay?
Yeah, my week's been pretty interesting. I actually missed out on the Armory yesterday because I was filming a YouTube video for one of my friends. I ended up shaving off all my hair again, and I'm bald again. So yeah, it feels weird again. It feels weird again having no hair.
Yeah, you just kind of walked in and we're like, oh, you're bald again. Huh.
Yeah, $100. Maybe it'll help me pay for my Vegas trip. That's my goal right now.
Are you thinking of going then, or?
Yeah, I'm really debating going, talking with like Kevin and some of the other locals here about going down there. Probably gonna have to sell like a bunch of my cards, but I think that will help me pay for the trip, so that'll be good.
Nice. Yeah, I think it'll be a really fun trip.
So yeah, we have a lot to talk about today, so let's just get right into the main topic. So let's talk about Prism's gameplay. Do you want to explain what Prism does in this draft format?
Yeah, Prism kind of reminds me of Guardian in that she's just very efficient and very flexible in how she uses her hands. She can kind of do a little bit of everything. She has a lot of 3 blocks like Guardian. She has the big attacks, some access to dominate. And while Luminaris doesn't attack on its own, if you get Spectral Shields, like they attack for 4 with Go Again for 3 resources and are a very real win condition. If you get multiple and your opponent like ever gets behind and has to just keep blocking your Spectral Shields, like they're almost locked out of the game, it feels like. And then you can, on top of it all, you can go wide and do that as well because you have some Go Again in the deck. So Prism kind of does everything, and everything is like on rate or above rate. Although she does, of course, have the drawback of Phantasm. So all of her illusionist attacks pretty much end up getting popped by 6 powers. So that's kind of her drawback, but otherwise just good solid flesh and blood. Use variety of hand sizes well, block well, hit hard, kind of does everything.
Yeah, I think it's my personal take on this format. I think Prism's the best hero. Just has the deepest pool, and just all the cards are good. So there isn't, like in all the other formats, Prism really doesn't have any like just truly bad cards in their pool. Basically any card you pick up that is light illusionist or even generic can be played pretty well in Prism.
Yeah, she's definitely very powerful, and I think very intuitive. When we originally had Monarch, Prism was extremely popular, and I think that people will branch out a little bit and play, especially some of the shadow heroes more. People are really avoiding. I think now that we've seen what Chain can do in CC, more people will be willing to pick up and draft that deck. But I agree that Prism is super, super powerful and just pretty easy to pick up and play. It just plays like very traditional Flesh and Blood. So one thing to keep in mind, I think, when you are playing Prism, is one of the biggest ways you can get blown out and fall behind is if you put yourself in a spot where if you get popped, you're stranded with cards in hand. So for example, if you're going for the line, pitch a blue, play a Spears of Surreality, and you want to follow it up with a Herald, that's a very good turn. But you want to make sure, ideally, that your arsenal is empty so that if you do get popped, you can still arsenal that Herald and it doesn't get stranded in your hand. So I think whenever you are playing as Prism, you really want to I'm always kind of thinking about like, what if I get popped here? Do I have a contingency plan for that? And sometimes you just can't, you just have to pray. But really, like most of the time, you can arrange things in such a way that you're blocking with your extra cards, you're swinging your non phantasm stuff first, you're trying to, I don't know, maybe you can pitch a card to soul if to her hero ability to banish a card from your soul and make a spectral shield. But you really do want to be finding a way to make use of all of your cards, and I think that's something to keep in mind when you are playing as a Prism and even playing against her.
Yeah, I think my worst experiences with playing Prism would be those 4 card hands, and I'm starting with a Spears, and my opponent plays a Pauper, and I have 2 cards left in my hand. They're just like 2 red heralds, got an Arsenal 1, draw 3 cards, and it feels pretty bad because then they have a 3 card hand that they're attacking you, and they took no damage.
Yeah, it's just a huge loss in efficiency, and we kind of alluded to it earlier, but Prism is really a deck like Guardian that's all about just efficiency and consistent value out of their hands. So if you're getting stranded with like 2 to 3 cards and that happens twice in a game, like you might not be winning that game off the back of that. So you do need to plan your turns in a way where you're minimizing this risk as much as possible.
If I'm building a Prism deck, what does a Prism deck typically look like?
I think for me, I want a lot of blues. I would say like I really want like 12 at least. I'm pretty happy playing like as many as 15. Ideally 3 blocks. Like if you're starting to get into a lot of junky 2 blocks, you can go a little bit lower. It kind of depends a bit on your curve as well, which we'll kind of talk about when we talk about the key cards. Yeah, I would say sort of like the 12 to 15 blue range is pretty good. You want to prioritize 3 blocks as much as you can. You probably want a whole bunch of the heralds in your deck, which should be pretty easy to get because most of her commons and rares are actually heralds. So you will see a lot of them, and you Prism's kind of just like a good stuff deck. You can just put good attacks in, good 3 blocks, and you have a pretty functional deck. So as long as you're hitting that blue count, I don't think there's too much else that I'm looking for in my Prism decks. What about you, Jay?
I don't think I'll play that many blues in my Prism decks. It might just be due to not finding enough blues. Like it's like they just don't exist when you draft Prism all the time. Obviously, if I can get like 12 blues, I would play them. But I think a lot of the times when Prism does get cut, I end up with like 9 blue decks, 10 blue decks, even 8 blue
Mhm.
decks, and I think those are okay still, as long as on the first cycle you're not desperately reliant on the blues.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it does depend a little bit on your curve. I really like to have I really like to lean into the spectral shields when I play Prism, and so I often want to have like I'm pretty happy having 2 blues in your hand. Also, the other thing is the blue heralds are just so good. Most of them attack for 5. Just having the upside of also pitching to Iris and still having the on hit at a breakpoint and everything, like I'm the blues are like almost my favorites. Like of course the reds and the yellows are also good. The higher power does matter, but I like the consistency of the blues if I'm able to get them. But I agree, she can function off less if you have to. But I would aim for higher personally.
I think the worst case scenario would be if you had like 5 or 6 blues. Then I think you might be like too concentrated on your yellow pitches, and that's not exactly where you want to be. I think the blue heralds are very good, so you want those, and then the red heralds are really good, so you want those. So if you have a choice between red, yellow, blue, it would be blue and reds before the yellow ones. And I think that might be a little bit not counterintuitive, but how would I say it? Because like in CC Prism, they only play the yellow ones, right?
Yeah. That's actually a good point. Yeah, CC Prism really wants a high density of yellows, and I think that that's primarily because of Luminaris giving everything go again if you have a yellow pitch. Actually, I know that's why. You can draft Luminaris, and if you do, you can draft a deck that looks like a CC deck, and it will be very good. I think Luminaris is one of the biggest bombs in the set. But most of the time when you're drafting Prism, you are on Iris, which does really want blue pitches, and I think maybe moving into our next section, key cards. One of the key cards in Prism is Spears of Surreality, which is a 5-for-1 go again with Phantasm. And blues work really nice with Spears because you can pitch a blue, play a Spears, and then play pretty much any Herald. If you do have like Wartune Heralds, which are the 1-cost Heralds, you can get away on yellows more by doing like Spears into Wartune. So that is like one way you can cheat on your blue count, and does mean that Mortune is quite a nice herald, even though it doesn't have an on hit. In general, I think that Prism's often wanting to have a blue. And if you do have a Spectral Shield, having multiple blues can also be quite good because you can do Iris with Go Again into even Spear's Herald potentially, but often just a single herald.
And talking about Spectral Shields, I think the next key card to talk about would be Prismatic Shield Red. This card is unreasonable how good it is. So this card just creates 3 Spectral Shield tokens, and it's just an illusionist instant. And it costs 3 to play. I'm having a hard time explaining this card. Like, why is this card so good?
It's just how powerful Spectral Shields are. As like a baseline, they're going to gain you 3 life and potentially stop some breakpoints and on hits, which could be giving you extra value, kind of in the way that armor does. And 2 cards for 3 life, even if you're getting breakpoints, is not fantastic. But I think when you factor in the Spectral Shields as weapons being really, really powerful in a win con in and of themselves, like Prismatic Shield often is just enough to bury your opponent, and you can often create game states where maybe your opponent doesn't have that good a turn, you eat some damage, you play a red prismatic, and then you crack back with two Iris swings for 8 Go Again. And then, on their next turn, they're trying to punch through and pressure your shield, so they can't really block that 8. And if you keep some of your shields, you can just keep like 1 or 2 cards and just start swinging them. So once you have Spectral Shields, especially in multiples, it really kind of changes the flow of the game. And I think that this card is just so good at getting you to that state that is really, really, really powerful. If you ever play this on turn 1 or turn 0, rather, you kind of just win the game. It feels very hard to lose from that spot. And I think that in particular, it's really good against Levia, who does have a lot of poppers in her deck. So often finding a way to establish that Spectral Shield and then just hitting her with it over and over and playing very defensively can be a great way to win a game. So this is sort of like a nice way to do that, although not the only way.
And I think in the same vein, the next key card that we're going to be talking about, Invigorating Light. Invigorating Light is a light attack action that costs 3 to play, but it says when you play Invigorating Light, if there are no cards in your hero's soul, put it into the hero's soul and when the chain closes. This card is basically a herald that has its on hit to go to the soul, but this card does not have to hit, and this is your first card that goes into your soul. The same reason why Prismatic Shield and all the talk about the Spectral Shield is good, using Prism's ability to generate Spectral Shield is just like another way of getting Spectral Shields out. But if your opponent keeps on blocking the Heralds and don't let those hit, it's hard to generate Soul. And Invigorating Light just surpasses this like whole requirement that your opponent gets to block this, or it's just like it's so unfair, right? When your opponent plays Invigorating Light.
It's really good, and I think good in all matchups. But again, really like you want to have some of these ways to get Spectral Shields and get Soul against Levia, or I think the matchup can actually be pretty challenging. Like you really do need to rely on your weapon and the aura repeated value to kind of deal with her. You can try and fatigue her, but I think really good Levia decks are pretty decent at overcoming fatigue. So
yeah, they have a lot to dominate.
yeah, ideally you do want to be pressuring and getting a Spectral Shield and being able to hit them with it.
Yeah, I think these are just the 3 main cards you need, like Spears of Serenity, Prismatic Shield, Invigorating Light. If you have like a couple of copies of these cards, obviously Invigorating Light and Prismatic Shields are rare, so it's a little bit harder to come by, but Spears of Reality is a common. You want to have like some combination of these cards in your Prism deck, and if you have like 2 Spears and a Prismatic Shield red, or 2 Spears and an Invigorating Light, your Prism deck's probably just good enough to beat any of the heroes in the format.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. These cards are a lot of the power level of Prism, and then otherwise it's just sort of like how consistent is your deck, how many 2 blocks do you have is a big one. Like lower is better, of course, but yeah, having a few of these key cards is very important. You want to jump into equipment here?
Yeah, let's do that. The first card to talk about will be Halo Illumination. So this is a light equipment headpiece. This card reads, instant pay a resource, destroy this card. Put a card from your hand into the hero's soul, and if it's a light card, draw a card. And this card also has Spelled Void 2 for some reason.
So all the stuff that we talked about getting a soul, getting Spectral Shields applies here. it sort of like hand fixing in a way or letting you filter is really good. Also, the play pattern of pitch a blue into this and then use the two floating for Prism's ability is also really, really strong. So it can just kind of get you a spectral shield. And I guess it costs you a card because you have to pitch the blue, but it doesn't cost you a second card because you draw a card so long as you can banish a light card, which should be relatively easy to do.
Yeah, very easy to do. This card is pretty interesting in the sense that it doesn't read too powerful. How highly are you picking this card?
I pick Halo pretty early. I would I pack one pick one it? Maybe. I don't think I'd be thrilled to pack one pick one it, but I often find myself picking it up around like pick 3 or 4. Kind of same place I would take Ebb and Fold, honestly. I think that they're both very powerful. And a nice thing about Halo is that it is a flexible card that is also good in Bolton too, because surprise, he wants cards in Soul so that he can give stuff go again. So just being able to feel that, basically one resource for a card in Soul is just really good. And then you factor in the sort of like card selection because you get to filter away a card and draw a card, and also the spell void if you're playing against Runeblade and you need to stop some arcane in a pinch. Like you just get a lot of utility out of this card, and it just ends up being very good.
Yeah. Surprisingly, Spell Void 2 is very relevant. Just against Chain. It's so good against Chain when you have Spell Void. And just like that alone makes me just want to pick up the Halo, just so I get that one extra life against that deck. It's not just that you get the one extra life, it also just turns off your opponent's turn sometimes. So if you see like Rip Through Reality or a Piercing Shadow Vice in your opponent's Banish Zone, if your opponent tries to do one arcane before, you just go use the Halo. Is your Rip coming in this turn, or is it going to deal you 1 damage to you because you're not going to play it this turn?
Yeah, and so you're kind of forcing them to almost have like 2 arcane on that turn, which is doable, but much harder than a single arcane for sure.
Yeah, honestly, sometimes impossible unless they have Seeds of Agony.
Yeah, exactly. Seeds was also the card that I was thinking of. Yeah, so Halo, very good card. Other equipment you might want to keep an eye out for is Blood Drop Brocade. This is the chess piece where if you've dealt or taken damage, you can gain a resource. It does fit nicely into some of your go again turns with spears. Often, if they don't have a popper, they're pretty incentivized to take the spears because, or at least like 3 block the spears and then wait because most of the heralds have on hits. So, pretty good there. And the thing I really like about this card is it enables, for one, it enables the rare auras off a single blue pitch, where if you've taken, you can sort of intentionally leak a damage, and then once their action points used up and they can't hit your aura anymore after you play it, you can pitch a blue, play an aura off of kind of 2 cards. And I mean, people played Tunic in Prism primarily to pitch a blue and play an aura, a yellow aura off of 2 cards, and that was a very good constructed deck. So being able to do it in limited is also very good. I think if you have auras, I really want this card.
I think we're going to be talking about auras a little bit later in the episode, but
Yep.
I would play auras like even without Blood Drop Brocade, and when I have Blood Drop Brocade, the aura value goes up even more. So this card is a very good card to pick up.
Yeah, they work well with each other. If you have the blood drop, the auras go up in value. If you have the auras, the blood drop goes up in value. Another card that it pairs well with is any of the Ironhide equipment. We kind of talked about Prism being defensive and having lots of blues ideally. So if you have 3 Ironhide, you can pitch 3 and block 6. But I think the Ironhide is particularly good in Prism because you can pair it with her hero ability to make a spectral shield, which costs 2. So you can sort of, I guess you're still getting a 3 block out of it because you have the Ironhide equipment and the spectral shield, but just the spectral shield potentially staying on board is so good. So just you're like basically still blocking 3 or blocking 2, I guess, and then making a spectral shield, which is really strong. So Ironhide, very good.
How much value do you think a Spectral Shield generates typically if you make one?
Geez, it's so hard to say. The baseline is of course 1. I think it's pretty common for this to like sometimes hit an on hit, in which case it might be more like 2. But the ceiling is really high, right? Because of the recursive weapon nature of them. Like I've won games off a single spectral shield before. So sky's kind of the limit on this card. I don't know what the average value is. Do you have a number? They're very good. I just don't know if I can assign a number to it.
Ooh, I don't know if I can assign a number, but if my opponent attacks me and I can trade a card for a Spectral Shield, I would. So that's typically worth at least like 3, right? A card might be worth like 3 points, and I would easily trade like a Herald. Like if my opponent attacked for 3, I would like give up my red Herald if I really had to. Like it's just like if that was my only card that blocked for 3, I would just like immediately give it up. So
Yeah, I would often block out with my entire hand to keep my spectral shield if I can. And this is something that kind of happens in the Prism mirror a lot, that there's this mini game of like, can I get a spectral shield? And once I do, I can just kind of hit you with my spectral shield and make you deal with it. It's not uncommon to just like block 3 on a red herald and swing your spectral shield and just keep doing that over and over and over again. So yeah, spectral shields are, we've been saying it a lot, but they are really, really incredible.
yes. Let's talk about the last equipment on our list here. It's Dreamweavers. So this is the illusionist handpiece. No, not it's not called a hand. What is it called in this game?
Arms.
Arms piece. Yes. Dreamweavers is a illusionist arm piece, and I can't find it.
I got it. It has it doesn't block. It has Spell Void 1, and it has as an action destroy Dreamweavers. The next illusionist attack action card you play this turn loses and can't gain Phantasm. Go again. So it is an action. You have to do it beforehand. Dreamweavers is, I think, the worst class equipment, but it is still very good. I think that some people are under the impression this card isn't great, and I don't think you need this card to be a good Prism deck, but the Spell Void one, just as we mentioned before, very good. I like it in spots where it allows you to play in a way where you can go low and swing a Herald and take, like if your opponent's at 2 and you can swing a Herald, or they're at 1, you can swing a red Herald for 7, but if they pop you might lose the game. Just having Dreamweavers in that spot to go, no, this doesn't have Phantasm, I'm going to take over the game from here, is really powerful. And I think it also enables you to kind of lean into Herald of Tenacity, which is the one that gets Dominate and attacks for 6 at red. You can turn this into an end game where you can pump this up. Maybe it can go like Phantasmify, which gives it +5 in Phantasm. Then you pop your Dreamweavers and you play your Herald of Tenacity for 11 Dominate. And that's like a really good way to close a game. So I do think Dreamweavers is really good, but I don't think it's essential to the deck functioning either.
A good way of thinking about Dreamweavers would be it's like a little bit of an insurance card that you get to have if you need it. And there are some combination of cards where Dreamweaver value goes up, but it's not like a card that's like on its own good. You need to complement it with like a couple of other cards.
And it's also nice in that Spears situation that we talked about, where like you have 4 cards because maybe your opponent blocked out and you're like, please don't have a popper. If you have Dreamweavers and you can Dreamweavers the Spears so they have to deal with that, it's just like, well, then you've presented 5 go again and they have to do a popper as well. And like you've done pretty okay with your hand at that point. So yeah, just I think the key to this card is to be patient with it and use it when you feel like it's going to matter and be like, I really can't get popped here. I really can't afford to get popped here. That's when you want to use it. You don't want to just kind of be like, I have a Herald, so I'm going to use my Dreamweavers. Unless like maybe if it's like a very good one and they're low or something, that there are spots where you want it, but do be selective with it. Don't just throw it out on the first Phantasm card you have.
I think that's the biggest mistake I see with Dreamweavers when I'm watching people play Prism would be I see people use Dreamweavers and I'm like, not really sure why you use Dreamweavers, and I have a feeling that they also don't really know why. You need to have that like very methodical planning of when to use Dreamweavers. It's really tricky. It's really tricky. I think you just have to practice a little bit, talk about it with your opponent after the game of like, should I have used Dreamweavers here? What do you think? What do you think not? Like, and I think the last thing I just want to talk about this card would be if you just have the read that your opponent has a popper, you should probably use Dreamweavers.
You don't see this much in Constructed, or sorry, you don't see this much in Limited, but the most classic read in Constructed against Drome Eyes is when they have a card in an empty arsenal and they go, yeah, no arsenal, and you're like, okay, I understand.
Yeah, that happens in Limited too, where they look at their 6-power card and you're like, oh, they're not going to arsenal that card? I wonder what it could be.
Yeah. There are other ways you can get a read, but that is definitely the most overt one that comes to mind right away.
Yeah, or if you're a sicko and if you just want to like track their pitch stack, there's a couple of people who would like pitch a popper for late game. Then you can line up that Dreamweavers on that turn as well, and that's pretty. That could really hurt your opponent that way.
Yeah, and I think the effect is particular. I kind of mentioned it before, but it's particularly powerful in the late game if you can use it to strip multiple cards from hand and just guarantee that. Because often, I think everybody's like been in that spot where you're like, if I can just take their cards and I'm gonna walk away with this game from here, there's no way they can come back. And Dreamweavers does give you the insurance to just overcome the Phantasm to do that. So that's another great spot for it.
Okay, I think enough about Dreamweavers. Let's talk about attack actions that are generically good in Prism.
Do you want to start with the Heralds?
Yeah, let's start with the Heralds. So the Heralds are so all of the common light illusionist action cards are all heralds, and we do have some rare ones and mythic ones as well. Where do you put the heralds in power ranking, like compared to just other cards in the set?
I think the Heralds are some of the strongest cards in the set. They're just all above rate. They block 3. They are good in every pitch. Like the red ones usually hit for 7 and have an on hit of at least going to soul and often some other effect. The blue ones are just blues that attack for 5 and have an on hit. And then the yellows, still good coming in for 6 and can pitch for your reds. We kind of said that we like the reds and the blues the most, but all of the pitches are good cards, and honestly all of the heralds are pretty good cards. I think that it's like a step down from some of like the powerhouses. Like it's not as good as Soul Reaping, and it's probably not as good as some of the class equipment. It's probably a little bit lower than like Spears, Prismatic Shield Red, those key cards, but they're up there. They're very, very good. I would pick one a nice herald sometimes for sure.
I would pack one, any herald, but yeah, that's that. We're gonna leave that for a little bit later in the episode.
Of the heralds, do you have like a favorite, like a one or two favorites? We kind of said that they're all good, but
Yeah, my favorite is Herald of Rebirth. So this one is on hit. Put one Phantasm card from your graveyard on top of your deck. I think this is a Herald where if they let this hit, then you get to put a Spears of Sorality red back on top of your deck, or even like a blue Herald back on top of your deck if you had to block with it. If you are like desperate for blue pitches, it's like just super flexible. Your opponent doesn't really want to block it because it doesn't actually generate a value, but it still goes to soul, so they still have to kind of block it. Like, playing heralds is pretty powerful, and then when this one hits, you get to play. You're guaranteed to play another herald or a Spears of Sorality. I think that recursion of just like continuous threats is pretty good on hit. Do you have a favorite one?
I think my favorite one is Protection. This is on hit, make a Spectral Shield as well as going to soul, so it's like kind of two Spectral Shields in a way. This card is a beating. I especially like the red and the red and the blue are both so good because of the breakpoints. The Protection feels like the one that is the most you have to block this. Letting Protection hit is really, really bad for you, and being able to hit that breakpoint of 7 or just having a blue that can demand 2 blocks from your opponent is really, really good.
Yeah, I think I agree with that portion of they have to block Herald of Protection. They can't really let this card hit. But at the same time, if they always block it, you never make a Spectral Shield or it doesn't go to Soul.
Yeah, but if they have to block 3 cards on your 7 power Herald, like that's good for you.
That is good for you. That is good for you. I think that's just maybe my evaluation of the card is wrong. That I like Herald of Rebirth a little bit better. Is I feel like people misplay against Herald of Rebirth a little bit more often than against Herald of Protection. There will be spots where Herald of Rebirth, they cannot let this card hit, or I'm gonna run away with the game where I can like put like another red Herald on top, and then they can't actually get out of that. But they still let the Herald of Rebirth hit for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a Herald of Protection red, I just attack with it, and they just like immediately give me 3 cards, and I'm like, no misplays there.
So yeah, heralds are good. Pick them pretty much whenever you get the chance, unless there's something truly incredible in the pack. But they're very high picks. And maybe an honorable mention. This one isn't a herald, but it kind of is. Enigma Chimera. This is not a light card. It's just an illusionist attack. It doesn't have an on hit or fuel your soul, but at red it is a 2 for 8. So it is kind of the biggest of them. I don't have too many thoughts about this. To me, this is just another herald. Like it doesn't go to soul and it does 1 more damage.
Yeah, it's like you lose the on hit, but then if your opponent still just can't eat this or they go too low, a turn that just goes like pitch a blue spears and spears red and just Enigma Chimera red. It's just a 13 damage turn with 3 cards. It's just like that's just so above rate that your opponent can't ignore it.
Yeah. Like, I got it. This card is Dunebreaker Centipede for anybody that's played Uprising. Same stat line, also Phantasm. It's the same card, and it's just as good here.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Doomebreaker was broken in that format. Red
Or
Enigma,
sorry, is it Dunebreaker?
Doombreaker Senpai? Something
Isn't
Senpai.
Dunebreaker the go again? Ember Maw. It's Ember Maw Centipede. Ember Maw
Oh, Ember
Centipede.
Moss Senpai. I knew what card you were talking about. But yeah, just 2 for 8. It's good enough. And you put it with a go again card, even better.
All right, so that's the Heralds. Any non-Herald attacks you're looking for in your Prism decks?
Yeah, let's talk about Illuminate. Illuminate is a light attack action card. The red one attacks for 4, blocks for 3, and it says if it hits, put it into your soul. So it has that Herald text where it just says on hit goes to soul. It has no other abilities, but the stat line on this card is just really good. It blocks for 3, it hits for 4. I don't know what to tell you. It just has good line. It has a lot of good numbers on it.
We've seen it before that the 4 for 0 block threes are really good, and this is a premium one because it goes to soul. On hit is pretty relevant, as you probably would have guessed by now, because we've been talking about how important getting soul is. And the blue one I also really like because it's just a blue block 3 that you can throw out as a 1 card hand, and like they kind of have to give you a card. They don't have to give you a card, but like this card is so annoying to get attacked by the blue one. You're just like, am I really blocking this blue 2 attack? And it's like, yeah, I probably am.
Yeah, well, I think the proper thing would be they should be blocking it. Giving you a soul is probably a mistake. Sometimes they make that decision error of like, oh, maybe coming in for an extra 3 points of damage might be better than blocking it for 2. But a lot of the time, it might just be better blocking it for 2.
I think you can pretty safely kind of assume the card going to soul on hit is worth like at least a point of value most of the time. Maybe if they somehow have like a ton of soul and you don't think they can use it all, but like that doesn't really happen in practice.
I think the one exception is like if you have soul reaping and like you're wanting the prison player to have 2 soul.
Yes,
Then it's just like, oh yeah, obviously I let this illuminate hit. Go to soul. You have 2 cards in soul. I blow you out.
that is true. Yeah. And maybe something to be careful of if you've seen a soul reaping in the draft as a prism.
Just before we move on, yellow illuminate. I like this card too for one reason. You can reveal it for what is that card called? Minnowism. No,
Belittle.
belittle.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about Belittle right now? Because I think that you have a bit of a spicy take on this that I think most people. Belittle does not seem like a Prism card, right? You're playing above rate Heralds. So do you want to talk about Belittle and Prism?
We've been talking at the very beginning where you wanted maybe like 12 or 13 blues in your deck. But honestly, like playing that many blues, and if you can't get like the blue heralds, you end up in a deck where you have a lot of 2 blocks. Instead of playing like 2 blocks blues that like are very mediocre defensive, and if you draw like 3 blues, it could be a bad thing. You could just play red belittle, blue minnowism, and then all of your other blue cards that you're playing, like let's say generics like Yanti Yanti, Blue Spears of Sorality, the Illuminate blue and yellow, the blue impenetrable belief, blue rising rising solar tide. Just all of these cards that you are trying to keep in your hand to attack with spectral shields get all naturally have 3 power for some reason. And they just have 3 power because it'll be broken otherwise. That also just in turn turns on that's a card you can reveal for your belittle. Belittle generates 2 resources, and what you can do with 2 resources is you can make a spectral shield with Prism, and then you still have the blue that you revealed for belittle, so you can attack with your spectral shield on the same turn you attack with your belittle. It's just so clean. It's so nice.
Yeah. So just to clarify, you're using it for blue minnowism, right?
Yes. I'm not getting a red minnowism off this card.
So just using it for the extra resources mode, and I think it is a neat way to do it. You can even play blue belittle in there if you have a blue minnowism, because it's like a blue that can situationally get you 2 more resources, which is really nice. How highly are you picking belittle? And let's say, well, I guess you're always playing Prism. How highly are you picking Belittle if you know your Prism?
At this point, red belittle is like really really high. It just has also that added flexibility of if you just don't have a way to reveal, you can still just go pitch a blue, attack with belittle, can't be popped, and then attack with a herald that could be popped, but it's a little bit less risky than spears of Sorality, where if they pop the spears, then you get stranded with the herald. That just never happens with a belittle. So I also just like that aspect of just playing the red belittles anyways. And then once I have a couple of red belittles, then I'm really looking for a blue minnowism. And I probably wouldn't go the other way around. I wouldn't find a blue minnowism until I find a red belittle.
Unless it's just like super late in the pack and it's low opportunity cost, I guess.
Yeah, like you're not gonna pick a shadow card. If you're gonna pick a shadow card, you'd rather have a blue minnowism.
Yeah. Or if it's like another blue 2 block, the Minnowism's probably
Yeah, slightly.
the best 2 block or like one of the better 2 blocks. It's up
Yeah,
there for sure.
if there's no opportunity cost, you just pick a minnowism blue, and then you can find a red belittle later in the draft.
You can play Heralds, Illuminates, Belittles, and maybe the last card that we'll talk about. You can pretty much play anything in Prism. Like you can play Poppers in it, and it's fine as well. The last attack that we'll highlight here is Zealous Belting Red. You can play the yellow as well, it's okay. Prism's actually very good at turning this on because all of your heralds are yellows with 6 power. So you can pitch one of them to attack with Zealous Belting Red for 5 go again, no Phantasm. The rate on it is definitely worse than Spears because if to get the 6 power, you need to pitch a yellow and then it doesn't fit. Like you're spending 2 cards for 5 go again, which is good. Like that's E-Strike with go again efficiency, it's still good, but the card does block 2 and Spears is like a little more efficient but does have the upside of Phantasm. So I think that Zealous Belting is maybe not quite as key as Spears, but is another way to go wide and have a similar effect.
Yeah, and I think a key here will be to have Enigma Chimera Blue. Enigma Chimera Blue is a 6 power blue, and if you pitch this card to play Zealous Belting, you have 1 resource floating, so you can have a line where you go pitch a blue Chimera, attack with red Zealous Belting, and then a yellow Wartune or a red Wartune Herald, and that's like a really clean, high damage 3-card hand that you can set up.
Fantastic point. Okay, carrying right along here, auras. So auras only appear at rare and majestic, and they pretty much are all illusionist light instants that cannot block because they're instants and cost 4 resources and come in only yellow pitch. The ones at rare are Parable of Humility, which gives your opponent's attacks -1, Merciful Retribution, which makes any of your Phantasm or Spectra popping deal 1 arcane, and if it's a light card that breaks, it goes to your soul. And then Ode to Wrath makes it so that whenever whenever your opponent takes a damage, they lose a life.
It's whenever a source you control deals damage to an opponent, they lose 1 life.
Right. And notably, it gives your is it cards with Phantasm go again? Illusionist attacks go
Illusionist
again?
attacks.
Attack actions. Illusionist attack actions go again.
So we've talked about this just before the episode. How high are you on these auras?
I'm okay on them. I think that I kind of like having access to at least one of them, just like as a way to turn on your iris. I'm a little bit lower on them than you are, though, I think. I like Merciful quite a bit into Levia as a guaranteed way to get soul, and I like Parable of Humility just because it can soak up so much damage and being able to play it, especially if I can play it off the blood drop, I think it's actually pretty efficient. But I kind of find these cards like awkward, especially in multiples because of the no block. And I'm often finding that like you kind of need to play these cards early in the game or they can just not get enough value. So like if you're low, you don't really want to take more damage to play an aura. And similarly, like I don't know if you really want to play that aura. You probably would rather be attacking with a herald. So you do need to kind of see them early. And that's been my experience with them. And so I'm often not picking them super, super highly.
That's fair. I also don't pick this card super, super highly, but I am definitely higher than you. I definitely want at least 1 aura in my deck. Sometimes I would play 2, but like if I'm playing two, one of them has to be a Merciful Retribution. I think these auras are the way that I think about them is that they're like a different version of like Prismatic Shield. Not the red one. The red one is like on its own class, but I would play yellow Prismatic Shield. I would sometimes even play blue Prismatic Shield. I think what is this called? The auras are very similar in that vein of if you really need to somehow guarantee yourself to make an aura on some turn, they are there reliably. And in those situations, I'm actually okay pitch stacking them, like against Levia, where I would pitch stack it, second cycle, play like a Parable Humility. Now they have to attack this to blow it up, or now I actually have a weapon that can put pressure on Levia.
Yeah, right. Because then it turns off most of their poppers. Not all of them, but really a lot of them. Yeah, I think Parable is also my favorite for that reason. It interacting with phantasms really nice. It's kind of expensive, but occasionally you can attack with a Herald, and if you have like an extra blue, you can kind of ambush them with a Parable of Humility. And if they've tried to block with a popper, it will make that popper down to 5 power, and then your Herald's also going to hit because there's no way that they overblock your Herald if they're popping it.
In that scenario, like it is like a very specific scenario, but when that happens, you're just so far ahead. Like I don't even know how your opponent comes back in limited from that unless they have time skippers. Even then, it's just not good enough.
It is really strong, and the -1 on all the attacks on Parable is deceptively good. I remember early NCC people were playing all of the auras except for Parable, and then at some point people are just like, no, Parable is real good. I think actually Oliver Fee, who we had on a couple episodes ago talking about their cube, was sort of one of the people that was really championing Parable of Humility and popularized it early on. So just fun tidbit since we had him on as a guest.
I didn't know that. I actually didn't know that. I didn't play Prism at all in CC. I was on the chain train the whole way until Starville came out.
Yeah. Okay. So we've kind of talked about the auras. They're pretty solid, but they aren't. I think there are better cards in them. What about the Majestics? Do you like Genesis? Do you like Arclight Sentinel?
I'm pretty high on
Have you
Arclight.
played with them?
Yes, I have played with Arclight Sentinel. I have not played with Genesis yet. Have you played with them?
I haven't played with Arclight, but I've played with Genesis. So maybe you talk about Arclight and I can talk about Genesis.
Perfect. I guess I go first.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Arclight Sentinel I think is really, really strong. So to talk about Arclight Sentinel, actually we'll have to talk about each of the matchups separately. It's a very specific card and you have to play it in different ways depending on what matchup you have. Against Chain, you want to use it in a way so that ideally you keep it until their pop-off turn, and then you play it halfway through their pop-off turn, so then you can maximize your blocks on their turn. Play the Arclight Sentinel, they have to kill it. Then they have only like a 4-card hand with not enough banish cards. So then you can basically block for 12 again. They deck out. They can't win the game anymore. So I think Arclight Sentinel was pretty good in CC against Chain, and it's basically the same kind of idea. You're using it so that your Chain players they lose one turn to try and deal damage to you. And in that spot, very good. Arclight Sentinel against Levia, it's pretty interesting. Levia, so in my opinion, the way that Prism beats Levia is either through Spectral Shields or through Deck Out, so like through Fatigue. A good way to fatigue your opponent is to force them to hit an aura. Arclight Sentinel is a card where they have to hit it, and if you can actually line it up on a turn where they're struggling to turn off Blood Debt, Arclight Sentinel can be like the one turn you needed to actually force your opponent to take 10 Blood Debt and they lose the game. And that's why I like that card there. Against Bolton, I have no idea. I've never played this card against Bolton.
It seems scary to me against Bolton. He usually starts with an attack and he can give it go again, and it seems a little scary to me, but maybe it's good. I guess if he has like a V, it's good.
Yeah, I might not play it against. I think I would take it out against Bolton. Bolton's I think you beat it in different ways, but yeah, I don't think Arclight Sentinel is good against Bolton. I've never had the chance to do that one. And then against the Prism Mirror, it's fine. It's an aura. It's expensive. It's an aura.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I haven't played with Arclight, but everything you said there makes a lot of sense to me. Genesis is a card I've played. I rate it pretty similarly to the other auras. Genesis kind of has this reputation of being like the most powerful aura. I feel like people are always like, "Oh my god, it's Genesis," and like, yes, if your opponent leaves you with Genesis, it gets really, really out of hand. But I think people at this point should know that you cannot leave Genesis on the board, and they just hit it. In my experience, the way that Genesis usually plays out is you play the Genesis at the end of your opponent's turn. You put a card into Soul and draw a card because it's probably a Light Illusionist card, and get a Spectral Shield. And then the next turn, your opponent pops it. So what you're getting out of the deal is you're getting a card in Soul and a Spectral Shield and an attack from your opponent. But you probably have to keep a full hand to do this because even if you have Blood Drop, you're looking at a card plus Genesis plus your equipment plus you need a card to banish. So that's 3 cards. And most of the time, if you're randoming a card off the top, you might not even be able to get value out of it. So I actually don't think Genesis is fantastic. It's just very, very slow. Your opponent can kind of blow it up right away, and it's fine, but it's a very big commitment to play because you do like not only is it expensive like the other yellow auras, but you actually need another card and you specifically need a Light Illusionist card in your hand. So I don't know. I wasn't super impressed with this card, honestly, when I drafted it.
That's everything you said makes sense. Yeah, because you need the extra card for this card to do like anything. Maybe I think it just is worse than the rare versions of the auras.
Yeah, I've also just like had it draw me into like a blue 2 block, or I keep a herald and I'm like, most of my deck's yellows, right? And then you like draw a red and you're just like, wow, this is a disaster. Like I just can't use my cards. So I think the fact that you really want to get the banish and then you're drawing a card and like it doesn't even always work out is it's just like very risky to play this card out. I don't love it.
That's fair. That's fair. I've never played with Genesis, but yeah, I think you actually talked me away from it now.
Yeah, it's fine. You can play it. I guess the place I would play it is into Levia. She has probably the least access to go again, so it's less likely for her to be able to hit you than hit Genesis, and she kind of has to like commit an attack to it, which is really, really good. And it also gives you a guaranteed soul. So I think Levia is maybe like the one place where like I would pick this card like later in a pack if you see it, but I think it probably gets picked too early in general. As a guaranteed way to get soul against Levia and a Spectral Shield, yeah, it's pretty solid there.
So you're at the sideboard card.
I think so. I think I would play it against Levia and probably no one else.
Talking about sideboard cards, let's talk about our defensive cards that Prism has access to. Let's start with Impenetrable Belief. So, Impenetrable Belief is a card that reads, if 3 or more cards has been put into the opposing hero's banish zone this turn, Impenetrable Belief gains 2 shield. Shield? Armor? Block? Block.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sort of what you would imagine. Relevant against the shadow heroes. Very good at helping you fatigue because it essentially blocks 4. Is there much else to say about this card?
Not really. This card against Bolton, if your opponent is going off on like a pop off turn, this card actually blocks for 4 on the last attack. Sometimes if they attack with a lot of cards because they banish 3 cards from their soul, and this card never blocks for 4 against Prism.
That makes sense.
But when you are trying to fatigue out Chain or even Levia, Impenetrable Belief is a very big role player in that. It's just a good card to have if you're trying to be defensive. Impenetrable Belief is like a must-have card.
Agree with that. Another defensive card here, well, defensive, is Blinding Beam. This is an instant that costs 1, and at red, it makes target attack lose 3 power. This can be used in a lot of ways. It can turn off Bolton's go again. So if you wait for him to activate his hero ability, then you play Blinding Beam. The attack no longer has higher power than its base, and his ability just doesn't work. You do need to respond to the attack reaction is like the very specific timing, but that's the optimal way to play that card there. It stops poppers, so you can use it to force through. Like this card is really nice in Arsenal, where if they pop you, you can just go, oh no you didn't, and again, like the blue pitch with a 2-cost herald and turning off a popper with this for 1 is really, really good. It's a bit of a beating. Levia and Chain, it cost 0 against them because they're shadow heroes, and then so it's just kind of like a 3 block with all of the upsides that we've talked about. So good card. Are you ever playing not the red? Or sorry, are you ever playing anything other than the red?
Yeah, I'm playing yellow and blue all the time.
Interesting.
Yeah, how do I explain Blinding Beam? Blinding Beam Blue is fine because it's a blue pitch, and then now the blue version doesn't have like that defense reaction upside of like blocking for 3, but it will force through poppers. It's still like a blue pitch that you can attack with your Iris. I think overall it's fine. It's not like a ideal card to play, but like it really does like blow out your opponent when it works. And then the yellow one is like actually interesting where yeah, it's just a 2 block. It's fine. I play 2 blocks all the time in Prism.
Is it that's specifically into shadow heroes, I'm guessing?
Yeah, and also like it still turns off Bolton's Go again.
Yeah, I could see it into Bolton. Okay, maybe you've
Yeah,
talked me up on the yellow. I,
like
I, I agree with the blue and the red, but I don't.
the yellow one, I'm just like, yeah, it still blocks for 2. It's like a block 2. Against Prism Mirror, it stops poppers if that's really necessary. You can actually pitch a blue, play Blinding Beam, block with the Iron Hide, pitch another blue, play an Aura. Like you just basically all the bad cards complement each other. So you can play if you have one bad card, you can play more bad cards, and they work well together.
That makes a ton of sense. I totally agree with that. If your deck is bad cards in it, you just add more bad cards, and then your deck's great.
Exactly.
Drafting with Jay.
It's just oh man, Prism is so cool. Just
See, what people don't know is that Jay says this stuff and will like say it during a draft, and then people will look at his deck and laugh at him, and then he'll just win anyways. So there's actually something to it, but I don't think anybody's figured out Jay's secret and how he makes it all work.
yeah, you just gotta line it up. Like it's just gotta put it together. And if you're saying you can't draw these cards together, you don't have to draw them together. You can just pitch stack them. You can do it on the second cycle. You know, like if you have a red belittle and you don't have a card to reveal for it, if you pitch the red belittle and the next card you pitch is a blue card, that blue card has 3 power. On your second cycle, then you have belittle with a 3. It's just so good.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. No, I don't know. I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm hamming it up a little bit. I think it's okay.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Okay, let's move right in. Let's talk about some of the good majestics for Prism then.
Yeah, we're not going to spend too long on these. We'll just kind of say good or not, and maybe very briefly why. The equipment, very good. Luminaris, if you can pick it up early, you can just draft a bunch of yellows, and your deck is very, very good. I think it's one of the biggest bombs in the set. And similarly, Footsteps is also very good. Footsteps lets you block and make a spectral shield, so you get extra value when you're making that spectral shield. And it also gives you some insurance against poppers by letting you pay 1 to get your action point back. So sometimes sometimes it gets rid of those blowout turns. So very good in CC, very good here. No surprises with those equipment.
Yep, also worth $200, so just pick it up.
Yeah, that too.
Soul Shield, good?
Super good. 2 for 6 D-React goes into your soul. Yeah, it's just like on rate and gives you a soul.
Yeah, perfect. Exactly what I want.
and it's a yellow, so you can pitch it if you need to. Card's very good.
Okay, next is Phantasaclasm. I've actually never played with this card. How good is this card?
I got to play with it last week in draft. Sort of funny. The same thing that I always complain about in CC also happened in draft, where both times I tried to play it, my opponent revealed a hand with no popper, but the take a card is not a May, so I took their like whatever card would cripple their hand the most, and they drew the popper and popped it. So sometimes it happens. I think on the aggregate, like you're more likely to catch a popper in their hand than off the top of their deck, but some amount of the time you will draw them into the popper and it will feel bad. But I think you should think of this ability mostly as an upside, and 3 for 9, really efficient stat line. So Phantasmaclasm, very, very good, but there will be some feel bads. Just, it's going to happen.
That's fair. Herald of Erudition. So this one is the 2 cost for 5, and it has Dominate. And it says on hit, draw 2 cards.
My guess is that it's fine. It's pretty good.
It
Okay,
has to
maybe
be
this
good.
card's pretty good. It has to be good. It's not as good as in Constructed because you don't have Luminaris to give it go again. Probably. I mean, if you do, then your deck is just obscene. But you probably don't have Luminaris to give it go again. But I guess you can make a Spectral Shield an Arsenal card. So and it's still like basically a Herald of Tenacity yellow. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it has to be good. It has to be good. It
Yeah.
just has an on. It's just. I play yellow Herald of Tenacity all the time. It's just a strict upgrade.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair. Yeah, and I guess you will if it hits, it goes to soul, so you can always make a spectral shield. Yeah, okay, this card's just good. I
Yeah,
haven't played with it, but yeah, it's good.
and neither have I. I've never had the chance to draft it, but it has to be good. All
Yeah.
right. Celestial Cataclysm.
I think getting 3 soul. So this is the 7 power with go again, but you can only play it by banishing 3 cards from your soul. I think playing this card is pretty hard. It was fairly hard in CC and it's even harder here, but it is still a yellow popper that blocks 3 and is resilient to stuff like Parable or the -1 Herald. What is it? Triumph? Herald of Triumph? You can pick this pretty much as like a yellow popper that blocks 3.
Good card.
Very solid. It's not like a bomb. Like I wouldn't be like, oh my god, Celestial Cataclysm, I gotta pick this and I have to be light. It's definitely not that kind of card, but you can play it.
And this is already like sorted for the don't play category. So the next 3 cards we're gonna talk about is you can draft it if you need it for your collection, but you should probably take it out of your deck, which is Tome of Divinity, Soul Foods, and unfortunately Library.
Yeah. Soul Food's basically just a yellow block too. Tome of Divinity is basically just a bauble. Library, I think the thing that's easy to miss about this is that as an action card, it doesn't pitch and it doesn't block and it costs 2. So you have to play this card when you draw it, or you have to arsenal it and then somehow get it out of your arsenal, which is just a huge commitment. And then on top of it, like you then need to get the clause of getting 2 yellows in your pitch zone to get the extra card. And even the first card, like if you paid 2 resources and an action point and this card for it, like you need to be drawing 3-ish cards to get the value back. And it's not going to happen. Don't even try.
Yeah, it's really funny is because it's limited, you can play this card and you could draw no cards, but your opponent could draw more cards than you off the library. It could just so happen to be that way.
Yeah. Draft it, be happy that you opened money, and don't put it in your deck.
Now the big question, are you going to pack one pick one library at Nationals?
Probably not.
No, you're going to pass up the library?
I think so.
Oh, I want to be
Maybe it
I
might
just
depend. It might depend like how well the day's going for me, how good the pack is. If it's a bad pack, maybe I'd pick
yeah,
it.
you start 3-0 on your CC round, first draft of the day. You open library, I want to be sitting on your left.
How much is library?
Library is, let's check right now.
Because when I bought library, I bought it when Prism was LL'd and it was like $100 Canadian. So I think my frame of reference is definitely off. I'm just not sure how much it's off by.
The Rainbow Foil library currently sells at $184 on TCG Player.
Maybe we'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Okay. So either way, there is a chance that library gets shipped to me if I am on her left. So I just want to be on her left, and I just want her to open just library, be like, please, one time, library and like soul reaping in the same pack, please.
Yeah.
Okay. So wrapping up, we should talk about the game plan for each hero. Let's start off with, how do you play Prism against Levia?
So we kind of touched on it earlier, but you really do want to establish a spectral shield and hit them with it and play very defensively. You're either aiming to fatigue them / kill them with their own blood debt, or you're aiming to kind of take over the game with spectral shields. But generally, it's not the easiest to fatigue them if you don't have any spectral shield value. So you probably still need that aura value, because if they're just like hitting you with 2-card 6s and 7s and you're blocking with 2 cards and over again, like you're gonna fall behind. So you do need a way to claw back some value with your weapon.
Yeah, and Levia typically has a couple of good dominate cards, so if you do fall below like 4, they could just like hit you with one attack and you'll die to that. So
Yeah, you can't really rely on the heralds getting through, but if you are stuck with extra cards, it is still worth swinging your herald because it does force a card out of their hand that they sometimes it can be awkward. Like maybe that's a card that they actually really wanted to play, or they have, I don't know, Smash with Big Tree that doesn't actually have a block value. So attacking them with heralds is something you can do, but you don't want to be keeping cards in your hand and taking damage to do it.
Yeah, yeah. When you use two cards and they only have to give you one card to just block the whole card. You want to avoid that situation as much as possible. Obviously, sometimes the Via has some off turns, and when they have an off turn, just ask for one card from their hand, and they'll have to give it to you, or then you're just doing the above rate thing as Prism, and you can take away the game from them.
Anything else before we go on to chain?
Oh, Binding Beam is very good against Dominate. So make sure
True.
if you have them in your sideboard, mostly the red one, make sure you bring it in against the Vaya.
Yeah, and also good against the poppers, so you can sometimes sneak a herald through. Dreamweavers goes a long way in this matchup as well because you can just be like, "Yep, I'm gonna use this." This is one where you can be like, "I have a red protection in my deck, and I'm gonna use it on my red protection to make them give me cards or give me a spectral shield." And that's like, okay, chain. You've kind of mentioned it already, but one of the ways you can win against chain is fatigue. I think often that is kind of the case because he just like he decks himself pretty quick and you only push so much damage. So I think you're often winning through fatigue against Chain. What does that look like? Is this like, are you block out fatigue, taking no damage? Are you trying to swing some attacks? Like how exactly are you fatiguing? Because there is sort of the difference between that proactive fatigue where you're fatiguing with damage and blocking versus where you're just strictly blocking. How are you approaching the matchup?
So when I approach the matchup, I think I'm a little bit different from most people. I approach the matchup as like a full out block out fatigue. I draft my deck in a way so that it lets me do that. But I think in general, it's better to do like the mix of like you're attacking with your Herald still, like the red Heralds with good on hits, mostly like Herald of Protection, where it actually like generates you a life essentially when it hits, and pitching with your like the two blocks that's not really actually getting you that much value anyways. So you pitch up two block, attack with a Herald, then use the other two cards and block for six. Is probably just like the highest amount of value you can gain. But you can be a blockout deck, but if your hand only blocks for 8, that could be a disaster. You don't always have the luxury of just blocking out chain. Instead of doing that, it might be just better to attack sometimes.
Yeah, so you kind of want to know beforehand how many three blocks you have and if it is possible or not. I often favor like slightly more proactive. I am trying to preserve my life total and keeping fatigue as an option and forcing him to play that. And sometimes he takes like a little bit of blood dead and then you hit him with a herald and all of a sudden he's like kind of on lethal range. But I'm trying to take like maybe I'll take like 1 damage to arsenal my herald, and then I'll take 1 damage to keep 1 card so I can pitch and play that herald from arsenal. I'm not taking like tons of damage to trade, but I am willing to take like a point here or there to get an efficient attack off and just sort of give them a little bit of pressure because I do think that if the chain deck is good enough and the pilot is strong enough, they should in general be able to overcome fatigue pretty reliably. So often mixing in a little bit of pressure can help quite a bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. Is if the chain player is very competent, then just blocking for 12 every turn isn't good enough. Which is why I say that I draft my Prism deck a little bit differently, where I'm picking up Impenetrable Beliefs ridiculously highly. I'm picking up Red Blinding Beam quite a bit highly, more than other people are. And I'm playing these so and so bad cards more than other people are, just so that I can fatigue chain. So I think my most one of my favorite games I played against Ian was like he was attacking me, but I'm just like, oh, on his last turn, I actually have 17 points of block because I have a blinding beam in my arsenal, I have a spectral shield, and I have 12 block in my hand. And it's just like, yeah, like just if you can push through 17 and I'm like 7, 8 life, or just like if you do 25 damage to me this turn, you deserve the win. And obviously that's not happening. So
Fair enough.
It's like if you are going into the draft and being like, I'm never gonna lose the chain by fatiguing, you can do that. If you have like 5 copies of impenetrable beliefs, like they're not going to push through that.
There you go. So yeah, you can do one of the two strategies, I guess, depending on how you want to approach the draft portion.
I think it's easier to do the proactive thing because then you just build a good Prism deck, and then you just play good as Prism, and then you can win that way. So honestly, I would recommend that more.
Okay, there you go. Don't always follow in Jay's footsteps, only sometimes.
Yeah, I would just have to say, like, if you try and draft Prism the way I do, you're gonna you're gonna either win or lose games at 1 life, and none of the games is gonna be a blowout.
Fair enough. Okay, Prism Mirror.
I guess I'll start with this one. I just play 35 cards and hope for the best. I don't even know what to say about this. Just that's what I do.
Yeah, I like boarding up. I think the spectral shields are really important here. If you can establish a spectral shield, I'm pretty happy to just block forever and swing with it over and over and over again. And if I can get 2 spectral shields and my opponent doesn't have any, like, might just win the game.
Yeah, yeah. Prism mirrors are so interesting. It's just like because the heralds can't pop each other, the herald value goes up. And so when you are playing against another prism or you know there's another prism on the pod, the value of your poppers go up very, very highly. So
Hmm.
you either need to try and line up a pop, like you need to line up a turn where you can pop them and deploy enough pressure back at them. So then you can comfortably have these spectral shield turns.
Yeah, exactly. So part of the reason the two, like, you can just like block 3 cards, spectral shield, block 2 cards, spectral shield, arsenal a card, block 3 cards, spectral shield kind of thing. And then when you do get the popper, like hopefully you have an arsenal card and you can go, okay, 1 card, stop your turn, pitch a blue, iris, pitch a blue, iris, swing a herald from my arsenal. And the game's just, they're not keeping their spectral shields. You're presenting, I don't know, 13 to 15 damage and an on hit, and only the last attack has phantasm, and they still need to deal with your spectral shields. And if they've blocked out with their hand, then you just get to keep hitting them with your iris again. So you can really run away with the game. And often that threshold of having 2 spectral shields is like your opponent's kind of in danger mode at that point.
I think the short term will be try and get 2 shields out, and then try and attack with both of them. Will be like a very clean win condition against Prism.
Yeah, and some nice ways to win this matchup is have more ways to generate shields than your opponent is very good. Red heralds are really good because they come in for the breakpoint. Go again. So we talked about spears and belittle and all of that, but again, that kind of lets you potentially present enough damage to take their shield. And finally, dominate is another way you can deal with the shield. So there are some ways you kind of, I think you naturally want those anyways, but ideally you have kind of one of those avenues to approach the mirror with.
A tip would be if you have a Dame like Tenacity, if your opponent doesn't have any Spectral Shield, consider arsenaling that card and attacking with a different card. Because it is difficult to pop your opponent's Spectral Shields in that matchup, and Tenacity is a really good way of doing so. Finally, Bolton. How do you approach Bolton matchup?
I don't have very much good to say about this matchup. I feel like this is the most kind of just try to be on rate, pressure them when you can, play your hand as efficiently as possible, and hope you can outvalue them. Like, that's kind of my approach. I don't feel like I necessarily have like I'm not trying to fatigue them. You're not so reliant on your spectral shields. I feel like you're just trying to do good stuff and stay on rate and hopefully not die to V. I don't know.
I'm actually so the way I try and line up against Bolton is I'm just looking for blinding beams,
Yeah.
blue, yellow, or red. I'm trying to look for their view of the Vanguard turns and lining up the blinding beam to that. So they go blinding beam, put 2 cards in soul, then you just go yellow blinding beam in response to your, trying to give it a go again. And then via the Vanguard just hits for 3 and that their turn's over.
Yeah. Be careful about blocking, especially if it's yellow blinding beam, because you could push its power back up. But
Yes, yes. Don't do
but
that.
yes. Yes, I agree. Blinding Beam very good in the matchup, and similarly, Parable of Humility also very good in the matchup because you can kind of block with a card, and then they try to give it go again, and then you flash in parable, and then next turn they have to deal with the parable. So like that, all of that is very good.
Mm-hmm. The other tricky plays you can do against Bolton is like block with an attack action after they charged, and then it goes up in point. They their attack goes up 1 point, so they try and activate their Bolton ability, and then in response you should just blinding beam it, and then their attack now doesn't hit. They lose their go again. They get stranded with cards in hand, and then you can attack with like a Herald or something like that, and then you're so far ahead you can't lose anymore.
That makes sense to me.
So blinding beam, good card.
Okay, last but not least here, how do you get into the deck? Maybe I should start here because I know Jay has some thoughts about the format.
Yeah, sure. How do you get into your deck, Yuki?
I think the power cards are a great way. So we talked about Invigorating Light, Spears, and Prismatic Shield, all being really good ways to get into the deck. But also just like you can pick Heralds. They're good cards. And if you see, I would say that if it feels like Prism is flowing, I'm seeing Prism cards, and I've taken like a light card, or maybe I just wasn't like, it was just a pack where I just felt like the Herald was the best card in the pack, and I have like a couple Heralds. Like I'm pretty happy being Prism. Zealous Belting is a reasonable way to get in the deck as well because it also goes into Levia. So sometimes you have like two Zealous Beltings. You go, okay, I'll either go Prism or Levia, and then I see a Herald. Okay, I'm Prism now. So that's kind of like how I tend to get into the deck. But Prism does, like we talked about just how deep her card pool is. So you can expect her to be contested, I think, but you can also expect that even if she's contested, your deck will still be pretty reasonable most of the time.
Yeah, definitely. I'm on the camp where you can probably have like 5 Prism players in a pod and still be okay. I know a lot of people don't agree with my statement. Actually, that's a good place. How many Prism do you think should be in a pod?
Like 2.5. I think actually maybe like most of the heroes in this set are 2.5, except for maybe Levia. I think if there's 2 prisms, the prism decks are going to be pretty insane. If there's 3 prisms, the decks are like, well, honestly, the decks are still pretty good. They do get worse though. I think maybe the biggest thing about 3 prisms for me is that it means some of the other heroes are on like 1 of or 2 of. Their decks also get better. So I think in some ways it's like maybe even less about your deck getting so much worse with 3 prisms and more about some of the other heroes getting better decks relatively.
So, if you can guess, my strategy for getting into Prism is no pivot, no scout. I will pick up Prism card, pack one, pick one. I will pick up a Prism card, pack one, pick two, and so forth until I literally do not see any Prism cards in a pack. And then in that case, I would be picking up generics that can be put into Prism, like, you know, this is how I found out Belittle pretty good in Prism, how Brandish pretty good in Prism, Overload pretty good in Prism, like just every generic except for Memorial Ground and Talisman of Dowsing pretty good in Prism.
Prism can do a lot with a little, and I think if you're really, I don't know, I still think that if you are comfortable drafting your seed and drafting multiple heroes, you can do that and be successful in this format. But I do think that Prism is like relatively easy to draft, just like very high floor. So it is a very safe way to go. And the only thing I'll say is that Prism is the deck I expect to be the most contested in draft. So I'm interested to see how this plays out because I feel like early on it was like very very light hero heavy, which did kind of make the shadow heroes like really good. Like if you're the only chain, your deck's pretty nuts. But then like as things get more even, Prism becomes really good. So there's this like weird sliding scale of like if everybody forces Prism and like one person's chain, that chain's going to have a field day. But if everybody's sort of like, I'm going to just play open and draft whatever and just lets the Prisms concentrate, then the Prisms will be very good. So not totally sure what's optimal in this set, but I think that there's multiple approaches you can take.
All I have to say is if you're at Canadian Nationals and you're sitting to my right, look, you can cut all the Prism cards. You're not gonna push me off. Just not possible. Not possible. I had a draft where there was like 3 Prisms to my right, and I was Prism. I was not moving.
I really want to see. I really want Jay's pod at Nationals to be all people who have listened to On the Bauble, and they all just like, yup, we're all playing Prism no matter what. And then some sicko will just like have the entire shadow pool to themselves and crush everyone.
Yeah, as long as that shadow player goes chain instead of Levia, I think I have a chance. I feel like the cards that I'm picking up is slightly different from all the other people, and even I'm talking about this, like people even after I hype up Binding Beam so high, people's not gonna pick this card. I'm still gonna get it pick 3, and I'm gonna be super happy about this card. You know, people still gonna pass me Impenetrable Beliefs because, as we said, like Spears of Serenity is a good card, so they're gonna pick that over this card, and then I'm gonna get the Impenetrable Belief. You know, like people's gonna underrate Belittle, and they're gonna be like, oh sick, I have this Belittle. Brandish Yellow, I love Brandish Yellow, good enough. Honestly, I'm at the point where if a card blocks for 2, it's good enough in Prism.
So, anything else before we wrap up? I don't have much to say. Viewers, you decide for yourselves. You're all adults. Well, maybe many of you are adults, and if you're not, you still can make decisions for yourself. You can follow in Jay's footsteps if you like. I actually think it has legs. I've seen Jay do very well. It is a thing that you can do. I think there are multiple ways to be successful in the format, though. So it's really going to be ultimately how you want to approach the format, and maybe experiment with a few different strategies and see what works for you.
Oh, sorry. One more thing I do want to say. We didn't touch about this card at all. It's a Tremor of Iatharel. I think that's how you pronounce this card. This card is also pretty good in Prism. It's most people just treat this card as a pure chain card, but it is a generic. And if you pitch a blue, banish the soul, and attack with Tremor, it attacks for 6, and you make a Spectral Shield. So that's basically a 2-card 7, and that is very, very good.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And if you have 2 blues, you can make a Spectral Shield, swing the Spectral Shield, Tremors. So yeah, that seems really solid.
Yeah, it's just it's I think if you are gonna go the no pivot no scout line with Prism, you really, really have to understand how every generic in the set interact with Prism, which other bad generic you have to play to make your deck functional. So if you're gonna go the no pivot no scout route, you gotta dig deep into the bad commons of the set.
All right. There you have it, folks. I think that's going to wrap up our show. And I just want to say next time you're at your armory, you can remember what Jay said. When you have bad cards in your deck, you can draft more bad cards to pair with them, and then you might have something great. Or you might just have a bad deck. I don't know. But if you can figure out the puzzle, you might have something great. Until next time, thanks for listening. You can reach out to us on Twitter. I'm at UkiliBender. Jay is at UedaJ. Or you can email us directly at onthebauble@gmail.com and send us any of your questions, feedback, comments, and so on. We'd love to hear from you. Also, in the comments down below, I'm kind of curious, what do you think about Prism in this format? Do you think Prism is hands down the best deck, or do you think this is a format where you should be staying open? How many Prisms are good to have in a pod? I feel like there's some disagreement about all of this kind of stuff in the format, and I'd be really curious to hear some of the viewers' thoughts about that. But yeah, that's it for tonight, and thanks for listening.